Welcome back to GameScoop, everybody. I'm your host, Damon Hatfield. I'm joined now by some very special guests, Per Schneider, Fran Mirabella, Sam Claiborne.
Hey, everybody.
And we're talking about some sad news, passing of Hiroshi Yamauchi, longtime president of Nintendo, but we're here to celebrate the life of a very important figure in the history of video games. I dare say we would not be here right now were it not for this man.
Not what he did.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think he was important mainly in the business side of things, right? Although he did, approve every single Nintendo game we ever played. But business-wise, like him and Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, were probably the two most important innovators in how to make video games, something that you can make money off of. Yamauchi did the home games. Nolan Bushnell pioneered home games a little bit before him with Atari and then, the arcade machines. But
I think Yamauchi had a real knack for picking the right talent to actually create the creative product of the company, right? He was the guy who discovered Gunpei Yokoi and, the famous hardware designer that gave us, some of these amazing machines here, but also Miyamoto, right? He took a chance.
Something in Miyamoto?
Yeah, he took a chance on somebody young and unproven and basically gave him his first game, right?
Yeah, and they weren't game designers. They were employed in other parts of Nintendo.
Miyamoto could draw very well, but was really imaginative, and out came Donkey Kong at the other end. And I think you can credit Yamauchi with a lot of those decisions and a lot of kind of just the guts to take a chance on people.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about it yesterday, and we thought, first of all, there's probably a lot of people who don't realize, this was the guy that had Nintendo, a whole new generation of people. But he was such a great leader, and is well documented saying he didn't really play many games, and that people give him a lot of crap for that.
He has a reputation for being very stoic.
Yeah.
Running a company that makes, amusement products.
But he was a great leader, and that was the point. He picked a great talent. Any great leader knows kind of how to drive the business, and he really did. And he really saved, you could say he saved the video game industry.
Exactly.
Atari crashed
Yep.
In the 80s, and he came in, with the NES product, the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yep.
That turned everything around. Like you said, we wouldn't be here today.
And the reason was that he instituted a series of things to combat what went wrong at Atari. So there was a flood of terrible games, right? So he created an excruciating process for approving Nintendo games. You could only make a certain amount a year if you're a third-party company. He had to approve every single one. There was just these rules to make it so there wasn't fluff. There wasn't fluff on that system.
Sounds like Steve Jobs a little
Yeah,
bit, right?
and if you hear from journalists who covered the business in Japan from the era, he was almost like the emperor, right? You went in as a third party to ask for approval or to become a third party publisher for Nintendo, and it was. He was just this highly respected guy who had to put his stamp of approval on everything. So it's kind of ironic, right? He's not the guy who would play the games and actually say whether they're good. He would look at the games, he would look at the concept, and he would look at the final product too, and he would can some stuff outright and say, this is not the right direction from us. And people would be like, but maybe they wouldn't say anything, right? Because they've been a little bit scared too. But they would just give up and do something else.
From my perspective, that sounds like a terrible boss. But a shrewd businessman, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think people probably, in his presence, were a little bit intimidated. In fact, I think you met him once, right?
I met him twice. Yeah,
Twice,
it
okay.
was interesting.
Crazy to me.
It is crazy.
Well, I covered N64, of course, back in the days, 16 years ago or something. And there was an event called Space World that Nintendo ran in Tokyo, in Makuhari, actually, outside where Tokyo Game Show is. And it was all Nintendo. And, the first time I saw him, I was on the show floor and they're playing, they're showing off all these games, including the original Animal Crossing on N64 that never came out in the
Animal
West,
Forest.
right? Yeah, Animal Forest. And you could it was filled with people and you could see people just partying. There was like all this commotion going on and then some very tall people in black suits and then suddenly out steps Hiroshi Yamauchi with his entourage, Minagawa, the translator, who's been with Nintendo for a long time. Wow. And, you just get this kind of respect. Everybody took a step back, right? Nobody rushed forward to go like, hey, will you take my picture? Or, nobody did that. Everybody just kind of parted and he walked through and, it was pretty intimidating just to see him.
Okay, so I had the same experience at Space World in 2000 when I started covering it.
You saw him also?
Time of GameCube. So I had the same experience and I described it with some similar words that you had before. He was kind of like the emperor, the amount of respect he got. To me, it was almost ethereal. He was coming down the steps. This was the first and last time that I saw Yamauchi. He came down the steps, and you saw this commotion. This small guy, actually. He was very thin and pretty tiny, then surrounded by this entourage. Yeah. And as he came down the steps, they bowed to their toes.
Yeah, they
and
bowed
so
really low.
If you know a thing or two about bowing, how deep you go is a sign of respect. And they were going down to their toes, and as he steps down, it was just it was amazing to see, like, this is the guy.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the first and last time I saw him, but you could tell how much influence he had based on that.
I got to bow to him afterwards too, but I honestly didn't exchange a sentence with him other than Hiroshi, like being honored to meet him. But it was backstage on the way to an interview with the creator of Doshin the Giant. Remember that one, right?
Yeah.
It was still
Unreleased.
a 64DD game at the time, and walking through, and then you walk into this room, and there's a table, and they're all sitting there, and it's like and he's just sitting there looking at us. And one thing you need to know about the press back in those days, they didn't take us seriously, right? Like for Nintendo, the internet was just kind of a weird thing. They're these young guys who are covering us. They knew we were kind of important, but not really.
Yeah.
And so, just walk forward and bow to him, and like he just
You're stoic.
the temperature is lower in the room when he's in it, right? Like you are scared of this guy when you see him, and so to think that that's how he ruled Nintendo, you could tell people were always antsy around him.
Think how different that is than Satoru Iwata, the current president
he's
of
such a
Nintendo,
friendly guy, right?
who gets on stage and like holds a banana and drives in a Mario Kart and stuff like that. I mean, it couldn't be more different.
No,
He's
very
a spokesperson for the company, and Yamauchi was never that.
Which is ironic because he took a business that was, playing cards, later taxis and love hotels, and turned it into a toy company. And when you think of toy makers, you think of fun, right? And he wasn't the maker of the toys; he was leading the company, but he is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, he's the perfect ironic toy company owner.
Yeah.
I love the arc. I mean, so Nintendo has been known as a video game company for 30-some years now. But the company goes way back to the late 1800s, right? Like it's a really, really old company.
Hanafuda cards.
Mostly making playing cards. And then when he was sort of like forced into taking over the company.
Because his grandfather's health was failing. Like
Yeah.
he never wanted to become the leader of the company, but he took over.
At 22 years old.
Yeah, he was really young.
A reluctant young leader. And then, one of the first things he did was kind of focus on, hey, what can we do with the business? How can we turn
He
it around?
experimented, diversified.
He launched a taxi cab line, but he also signed a deal with Disney to create Disney Hanafuda playing cards. Hanafuda playing cards, really traditional Japanese stuff, and he brings this American stuff into it, right?
It was a third-party deal that was so popular in Japan. I mean, it was the
blew up, right?
best-selling,
It was huge for them.
huge selling cards.
Disney, of course,
800,000
hugely influential in Japan, right? It influenced a lot of the drawing styles and the anime genre in total. And so he spotted that and jumped on it and turned the playing cards into that. So that was really clever.
In the 60s and 70s, electronics become cheaper to manufacture. They start creating electronic toys.
He hired Gunpei Yokoi in the 60s. So
Yeah.
when that happened, they started making toys like the Ultra Hand and the Ultra Machine, which are these kind of just plastic toys you put in your house. There's a love tester, which is pretty
Yes.
cool.
Yeah, that's right. Famous
And
one.
Gunpei Yokoi designed those. Now, he's a game you might recognize, too, because he created Metroid, and he worked on Kid Icarus, and he created the Game Boy, and eventually the Virtual Boy, which actually he was kind of forced out of the company by Yamauchi for.
Yeah. Virtual Boy was not a major success, and he left.
Yeah, he got a window seat, which is it's Japanese business practice. When you have somebody in the company who is established and well regarded, you don't want to fire that person because it reflects poorly on you. But you give them something to do that is not that awesome. It's basically a window seat. They've got something to do, but they don't really have any influence. So you can tell he was a tough guy. Like
And
when
to
something
Yamauchi's
didn't
credit,
work.
he found this guy who pretty much designed
Prolific.
a huge amount of Nintendo's toys and eventually games and products like for 4 decades. It's just amazing.
But the way I love the consistency, though, like think about the Ultra Hand and the Ultra Pitcher, and then the Ultra 64, which became, of course, the Nintendo 64.
There's consistency over
that line,
the-
of thinking is just really, really cool.
We were looking at some of the old Nintendo toys, and there's ones that look like the Famicom. There's a Ultra
From, like, the
Scope,
60s,
which is like a
right?
periscope toy that it's gray and red, and it just looks like the looks like the Famicom.
Yeah.
It's just really funny, and that's Yokoi's kind of design vision, but lasted forever.
The Magnavox Odyssey. Was that the first home console that was sold here in the U.S.?
Yeah, it was, and there's the Odyssey 2 that was
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit more.
But then
prevalent.
he licensed the Odyssey to sell in Japan.
That's right, yeah.
He licensed Pong machines to sell in Japan, and then he said, well,
Home Pong.
we should make our own.
Yeah, game.
And that
And
led
they
to-
even made a color TV 6 game, which is essentially Pong in color in Japan. That was Nintendo's first video game system. But then they went, their first success was not any of those things. It was, of course, Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it
the
was
arcade machine,
bringing
which
the
was Miyamoto's
huge hit game to America in the form of a refrigerator-sized machine, not a home machine.
Yeah, that was the first big thing they did that started to change everything, and that's what brought them into video games, I think. A couple of things I really like about Yamauchi as well are the money facts. Never wanted to borrow money, so to this day, I believe Nintendo hasn't borrowed has not borrowed a dime. It's not traditional. Companies normally like borrow some money, you expand your business. He didn't want to do it.
He's afraid of debt.
Yeah, afraid of debt. Exactly. Never wanted to be in debt and borrow money. That is to get out of debt. And then he was one of the richest men in Japan. He was at the height of the Wii, I believe.
Yeah.
At the height of the Wii sales, he was valued at $7.8 billion, I think it was, and he was the richest man in Japan.
He could have bought even more baseball teams than the Mariners.
Yeah, he bought the Mariners.
Yeah, he bought the Mariners. Well, so when they opened up Nintendo of America, he put his son-in-law in charge.
Arakawa.
Minoru Arakawa. He was in charge of Nintendo of America until Reggie took over, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Married to
Family
his daughter,
company.
actually,
Yeah.
right?
Well, because it's his son-in-law.
Right, exactly. But I mean, Yamauchi's
Yeah.
daughter was Arakawa's wife.
Yeah.
And it was, Nintendo was a family business, so, taking kind of continuing on that way made sense. But of course, with Iwata, a lot changed with that company. I just love that also, Yamauchi started by looking at the West, kind of what's going on in the West, and then trying to adapt it in Japan. But then, later on, that guy had entrepreneurial courage to just kind of do things completely differently, right? And when we first started covering games at IGN, we used to look at these statements from Yamauchi in the press all the time, right? Incendiary things that he would say. Like, I remember when Microsoft announced the Xbox, he's like, it's this company that has a lot of money and they think they can go into the video game business. That's never going to work, right? Like, he said these things out publicly in the Japanese press. But he also said some stuff about, whether the pursuit of power in video game consoles makes that much sense.
Yeah, he was disparaging a power, like high-powered systems. And that was contradicted a little bit when they put out the GameCube. He was saying that at the time, but then, of course, the Wii was the embodiment of that.
But already in 2004, he basically said, I don't believe that we should launch new consoles. We should extend the life of the consoles, which is what everybody did in the generation afterwards, right? Like with Kinect and everything. He invented, not Yamauchi, but Nintendo invented the Wii remote controls for the GameCube as a system to extend the life of the machine. And I think Nintendo got cold feet. Instead of writing it through with the GameCube, they released it as a new platform. And whatever you want to say about the Wii right now, that was a huge hit, right? It got people to play
and
games.
An even bigger hit, of course, was the DS and one of his final decisions. So he was kind of moved from
chairman of the board?
Yeah, president to chairman. Yeah. And at that point, he just made a recommendation. Why don't we try a handheld system with 2 screens? And then put really all Nintendo's eggs in one basket with it. And there's some famous quotes about him saying, Nintendo would end up very poorly if the DS failed, and the DS did not fail.
I think he said we're either on the way to heaven, right, like a play on the name Nintendo, which is the heavenly way, or we will go to hell.
Yeah.
Like, he was very dramatic in everything that he did.
Yeah,
right?
he also pretty much, in another quote, had said it would crush them or destroy them if it wasn't successful.
Yeah.
Lucky for them, it was extremely successful. Yeah. It was a very good decision.
I would have liked to hear his thoughts on the Wii U.
Yeah, it would have been amazing to hear what
But again, he
thought
wasn't
of
a
the
man you just go interview.
No. Yeah, he was very hidden away, actually, which
Sure.
maybe somewhat ironically, Yamauchi means within the mountain. So it was almost that hard to get access to him. So, yeah.
He had an incredible life, and his importance and relevance to the industry really cannot be overstated. I don't think so.
Still going to continue on. I think the company, Nintendo today, is still him. You can see it.
Sure.
I'll be very curious to see from Iwata and the future leaders when it is not as much of Yamauchi, but I don't even know if that's possible. He's half a century of influence.
I hope somebody else will step up who has the guts to kind of speak his mind, right, out in the public, and doesn't just admit failure or, say, hey, we need to do better there, but actually says specifically what they think is wrong in the market or what they want to change. And I think he had that.
Yeah.
And I hope Nintendo will find someone who will do that in the future too.
Thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time to talk a little bit about the life of Hiroshi Yamauchi. Stay tuned for more from IGN Gamescoop.